I want to talk a little bit about the size and speed of solid-state drives. Are the speeds the same as the 5400 and 7200, or how does that work?
So the speeds that we were measuring, these RPMs, are based on a disk in this drive physically being rotated by a motor. That is a physical measurable speed. This, since it's all memory chips, has no physical speed to it. The only way that we can really accurately compare those drives are actually benchmark tests. And if you look, when you buy these drives, most of them will list a read speed and a write speed for either type of drive. And you'll almost always see the read speed be quite a bit quicker than the write speed on hard drives, though they tend to be a lot more similar with solid states. So that's really the only way you can directly compare those types of drives.
So like a drive like this, aftermarket, made by a company, Otherworld Computing, they have something called 6G and 3G. Is that related to the speed, or what exactly is that?
So that's usually a marketing term. You know, every company is going to have some nomenclature that they're going to use to delineate their entry-level products from their mid and high-level products. The one thing to consider is what type of connection is being used by the drive. These are all SATA drives here, and there are 3 gigabit SATA connections and 6 gigabit SATA connections. And there's also a newer, more expensive flavor of these called PCIe, which use an entirely different way to talk to the motherboard and the rest of the computer that is significantly faster. So we have a lot of places where different bottlenecks can affect your computer. For example, if I have a PCIe drive of one speed and a SATA drive of the same speed, the PCIe drive is actually going to get data into my system faster than that SATA connected drive.
Let's talk a little bit about best practices for your hard drive in terms of how much you should use. What would you recommend on managing your stuff?
So by the time you're getting 75% full, you should probably be looking for other options for storage, or what the next thing that you can add in to give yourself some more storage. No drive, whether it's spinning or solid state, is going to function properly anywhere beyond 90% full. You have to have that buffer available to you for the computer to work and write things down temporarily and have sort of that scratch disk area to run the computer properly. And you'll notice significant speed decreases after that 90% full mark. One other thing to mention is how you treat these drives physically, and a big difference between them is a solid state drive, no moving parts. I can shake this, I can drop it, and really, unless I put a big dent or a hole in it, I'm not going to hurt it. If I start shaking, dropping, wiggling, dancing with a traditional spinning hard drive, it's going to break it. Just like if you took a record player that was playing and started shaking it, you're going to scratch your record up, you're going to break your arm off. It's really bad for these drives, and these are a lot more susceptible to physical damage. That's why you mentioned laptops especially, you're seeing people move away from traditional hard drives because people are pretty rough on their laptops and expect them to perform no matter what they use them for these days.
So let's talk a little bit about connections. I have this computer right here, and I want to talk about the evolution of what Apple has put on here. I think for a lot of people it's really frustrating to go from FireWire 400 to 800 to Thunderbolt 2. Is it one of those things that Apple is just gouging you to get to upgrade, or is this really the evolution of technology?
So technology moves forward at a very rapid clip, that we know. Whether you're on the Mac or the PC side, it's really the same. What's kind of interesting and different about Apple than your average PC manufacturer is they really like to trim the fat. If they think you don't need a CD drive anymore, you don't get a CD drive anymore. If they think you don't need an old port anymore, you don't need an old port anymore. And they're kind of making that decision for you because they want to have the most current technology, the most current ports in every system that they sell for the most part. PCs, you tend to have a broader range of costs. And so maybe those entry-level systems, they're going to leave some of that older technology around for a lot longer than you might see in a Mac system. And I think that's really the big difference in that.
So this computer itself, is a lot different than the computer that I had that I've referenced it with the matte screen from a few years ago. So we have, on the right side of a Mac, we have a USB 3 port, which can also be used as a USB 2 port. We have an HDMI, which is relatively new to a Mac within the last 3 or 4 generations. And there's also an SD card slot, which has been there for the last few iterations. On the left side, we have the power itself. What I like about the 15-inch MacBook Pro is there's 2 Thunderbolt connections itself, and also another USB 3 port. So in total, there are only 2 USB 3 ports on this, which most cameras are using for shooting tethered to. Now, we've gone from FireWire 400 to FireWire 800, which a lot of medium format cameras were using, all the way to abandoning the optical drive, abandoning FireWire, and now we're on the Thunderbolt 2, which Thunderbolt 3 is also just now coming out, and we have the USB 3 ports. So USB and Thunderbolt, they are kind of similar, they're kind of different, they do the same thing. Why do we need to have both? Why don't we just have one freaking port and have 4 of them?
They both transfer data, and that definitely makes them similar, but they really kind of do it in different ways. The great thing about USB is its backwards compatibility and its sort of ubiquity in the world. You can get almost any device with a USB plug on it, and it's probably going to work on pretty much any computer from the last 10 years. May not work the fastest, but it'll work. Thunderbolt is really what I would consider to be the continuation of the FireWires that we used to work with. But what has changed with every generation of those is the connectors and the cables that you need to connect those devices. We changed when we went from 400 to 800 in FireWire, and then when we brought in Thunderbolt, we got a new connector each time to handle that. But what has always been great is that you've really been able to push a lot more data through FireWire and Thunderbolt. They're really a bigger pipe. They're designed a little differently than what USB is. USB is controlled by the processor of your computer, and because of that, it tends to change speeds in mid-transfer, because a processor will typically only do one main thing at a time. So if you're transferring data, it'll transfer data for a little while, but then maybe you move your mouse or do anything on your computer, that processor has to switch tasks and handle that mouse movement or that keyboard stroke or whatever you're doing on your computer, and you'll actually see that transfer rate drop to nothing. So with USB, we get this sort of mountain range in our transfer speeds. So even though we may have a max of 5 gigabits, you're really real world getting a much slower connection. FireWire and Thunderbolt now actually have separate controller chips that regulate the output and input of data on those, so you actually get a very nice level playing field. So that's why FireWire 400 back in the day used to give you a faster real-world transfer time than using USB 2, which was 480 megabits. You would think that the USB would be faster, but because of the way the data is handled, it was actually slower in real-world transfers than using the FireWire.
So with transfer speeds, how important is it then to have a faster gigahertz processor? Are they related in any way?
Typically, no. Really, what transfer speed it's going to matter is if you're copying data, for example. Let's say you did a big shoot and you've got 10 gigs of photos. What's on both ends of their pipe? We really have 3 main components that are going to affect our speed. What are we transferring from? What's our connection in the middle? And what are we transferring to? So if I have inside my computer a really nice PCIe solid state drive, that's as fast as I can go there. And then I put a USB cable to connect my computer to my hard drive. And then let's say I put really nice solid state drives on that end. The lowest common denominator in that case is going to be my USB cable. So whatever the max, if I'm on 3 or 2 on USB, whatever that max is, that's going to be how fast my data is transferring. However, if I switch that and I had Thunderbolt drive system and a Thunderbolt cable, probably the lowest common denominator will be my solid state drives. Those can actually still transfer at a lower data rate than what the new versions of Thunderbolt can. That's why when people buy, say, a slow 7200 RPM spinning hard drive and plug it in with Thunderbolt, it really may not be any faster over that Thunderbolt connection than it is over a USB connection, because the lowest common denominator is that spinning drive. Or vice versa, if I have a nice solid state drive that I'm transferring off of, I can read that data very fast. But if I'm writing to a slow spinning drive, that's what's going to slow me down. So it's looking at the whole chain and everything in between that's really going to determine what my transfer rate is. Thunderbolt is a much larger pipe, not just to transfer things from one device to another, but allows you to daisy chain and connect multiple devices to each other. Thunderbolt can also transfer video from a monitor. So I could plug in my Mac into a monitor, have a workspace there, and then plug even 2 and 3 drives additional to that, and all those devices are going to have enough speed. That pipe is going to be big enough to transfer all that data at the maximum data rate of each of those units. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of connecting a ton of devices without needing like a USB hub or something like that that you might need to multiply the ports that you have on a computer.
So you're essentially looking at 3 things: the speed at which your data is at, the pipe itself or the connection on your computer, the connection that you want to get, and where that data is going. And we're going to be getting into this in a later section, but the backup and the speed at which your computer operates and the connections you have is time, and of course time is money on set. So when you are considering purchasing a computer, think about how much data you're going to be creating. Think about the file size that you create, that your camera creates for one image. Think about, multiply that over how many images do you think you're going to take over the course of a half a day or a full day, and that's going to give you the amount of gigabytes that you might potentially have to then have to back up. You're also going to have to think about the frequency at which you're backing up in terms of how often and how much of that data you're backing up. So these are all great things to consider. I still wish there was just one damn port on these machines. I feel like with every iteration of Thunderbolt 3, I now feel like I have to go out and buy a new machine.
Yeah, and I think the industry is trying a little bit to work to that. We now see the USB-C connector, which is actually going to be able to carry Thunderbolt data over it. And that's still very new, and we're not exactly sure what that's going to look like yet, but I think there's definitely some interesting things to come with connectors and what that's going to look like.
Great information. So I just want to give a quick recap. If you're thinking about purchasing a computer, you don't always necessarily have to have the fastest processor. Don't think that maxing out and getting the fastest speed with the highest number is going to give you the most amount of power for shooting tethered. Now with shooting tethered, it's more graphics driven and it's more multitasking driven with having something like Capture One or even Lightroom or Photoshop open at the same time. So we are going to recommend that you invest that money in the RAM before the processor of the machine, and also upgrading, if you can, the graphics card of the machine itself as well. So 2-3 years ago, you could always upgrade your RAM. We really want you to do the research on whether or not you can upgrade the RAM on your machine, whether it's a desktop or a laptop, and really approach the purchase of a machine that way before you make that decision. In your opinion, as someone who diagnoses and is constantly working on machines, what has a better warranty, a PC or a Mac?
There are a lot of different options for both, and some options that work for either type. You mentioned AppleCare. AppleCare comes from Apple directly. It's from the manufacturer. You're relying on a big, stable company for that support, and they do a very, very good job at that. More than likely, if you live anywhere near a large-ish city, you're going to have an Apple store within half an hour, an hour of you that you can go to, sit face-to-face with someone and have them look at your problems. And I think that is really hard to beat in the computer problem-solving world, is that face-to-face ability. Most of them also have repair facilities on site, which is often going to get you a much speedier turnaround if your computer does have a hardware issue that needs repair. Almost every manufacturer for a PC is going to have a similar hardware warranty, but you're typically limited to phone support or perhaps a remote support, though Microsoft stores are starting to pop up a little bit more, though they cannot necessarily do the same type of hardware repairs on every kind of system. There are also insurance policies that you get from your big carriers. For example, State Farm offers a personal article policy where if I have my laptop insured and I drop my laptop or I spill a glass of water on it, they will actually reimburse me for the cost and hand me a check the next day. However, if I'm having technical support issues and I can't get this program to run, State Farm's going to go, sorry, I can't help you with that. So consider your needs. Do you need technical support? Do you want hardware warranty coverage? Do you need accidental damage protection? There are a lot of options, both from the manufacturer, from insurance companies, and from third-party warranty providers that can give you different components of that, or all of the components of that. And of course, all at different price points with different varieties of service levels as well.
You know, yesterday when I walked into the Microsoft store and we got this, I was asking them about the actual warranty, and it's 2 years as opposed to 3 years with the Mac. But the one thing that I really liked about the Microsoft, this is directly from the Microsoft store, we got a Dell yesterday. The one thing that I really liked about this, it was about 130 bucks, but it covers damage. So if I damage this thing, if I spill something on it, if I drop it and break it, they're going to cover that, and they're going to replace it with the exact same machine itself, as opposed to Apple, who they're going to provide support, but don't think for 1 second that nothing is going to go wrong with your Apple machine. As someone who worked and saw the problems that came in, there's problems going to be on brand new machines, machines that are 2 years old, 3 years old. It doesn't matter how old your machine is. You need to have a solution in place for technical support, and also a solution in place to get that machine replaced as quickly as possible. So these are both things to consider when you're purchasing a PC or a Mac, is the support in place. And the worst thing that you can do is to not have a solution or even money set aside to replace that machine, should you not go with something like AppleCare or the warranty that somewhere like the Microsoft store offers to you. So those are also things to keep in mind. And lastly, as a piece of advice, if you're going to be shooting and you have clients on set, you're not actually going to need one computer, you're going to need multiple computers. So if you have a computer that goes down, you need to have a backup solution in place. So when you're thinking about buying a computer, you should really think about buying multiple computers if you're going to be operating at the highest level. And if you can't afford this, then you're going to need to start budgeting in what's called a digital tech. So hiring a digital tech, they'll usually bring at a minimum of 1 or 2 computers as a backup, and they'll have a backup solution in place in case something does go wrong. You can have a hard drive go down, you can have problems with a graphics card, you can have problems with your motherboard. These are all things that happen on set. And if you have clients on set and your computer goes down and you don't have a backup solution in place that you can swap out immediately, you're going to look like an idiot, and you're probably not going to get hired again, and that whole job is going to be a waste of money. So another thing to consider when you're going to buy a computer, it's very costly, so make sure that you're putting your money in the right place and you have a backup solution in place as well. Alex, this is all really good information. Thank you for coming out and sharing what you do on a day-to-day basis and how this information can best be put to use for you when you're making your decision on how to buy a computer.